The cold steel bars of the cage reflected faint glimmers of light from the hovering drones above. Yara, an alien girl from the planet Orvia, sat curled up in a corner, her once vibrant teal skin now pale and bruised. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the terrifying uncertainty of what was to come. The humans had captured her during the final stages of the war between their races. She expected the worst: torture, interrogation, and endless pain. This was the fate of all her people who fell into human hands, and she knew she wouldn't be an exception. Yara's mind drifted back to the stories she had heard growing up, tales of the strength and brutality of humans, a species known for their resilience but also for their cruelty in battle. Her people had once lived in harmony with nature, their connection to the elements unmatched. But all that changed when the humans invaded, tearing apart their world in a desperate bid for resources and survival. Now, she was one of the last of her kind, a prisoner with no power and no hope. The door to the dimly lit chamber creaked open, and Yara's heart pounded. She braced herself, expecting the beginning of her torment. Footsteps echoed across the room, slow and deliberate. Yara's sharp, violet eyes flicked up towards the figure approaching her cage. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in a dark cloak that obscured most of his features. The dim light cast shadows on his face, giving him an eerie, almost ethereal presence. He stopped just outside the cage, his gloved hands resting on the steel bars. Yara's breath hitched as she stared up at him, defiance burning in her gaze, though fear rippled beneath the surface. This was it, the moment she had been dreading since her capture. The man said nothing for a moment, simply observing her. Then he spoke, his voice low and calm, but with a dangerous edge. "I know what you're expecting," he said, "but I'm not here to torture you." Yara blinked in confusion. Torture was the fate of all Orvians who fell into human hands. Why would this human be any different? She narrowed her eyes, suspicion crawling over her like a second skin. His words didn't make sense, and yet there was something unsettling in his tone, something that made her stomach churn. The man reached into his cloak, and Yara's muscles tensed, ready for whatever cruel device he might pull out to inflict pain on her. But instead he produced a small, delicate key. He inserted it into the lock of the cage, and with a soft click, the door swung open. Yara's mind raced. This was a trap. Had to be. No human would willingly release a prisoner, especially one from a race they considered a threat. Yet the man stepped back, giving her space. His next words made her blood run cold. "You're free to leave," he said, his voice neutral. "But if you stay, I can show you what it really means to be free." Yara remained frozen, her eyes flicking between the open door and the man standing before her. She didn't trust him, but the thought of escaping, of running into the night, was almost too tempting to resist. Still, a part of her, buried deep beneath layers of fear and anguish, was curious. What could he possibly offer her? What did he mean by freedom? Her body ached from the days of confinement, but slowly, cautiously, she rose to her feet. Each movement sent a ripple of pain through her limbs, but she fought through it. Her legs trembled as she took a step toward the open door. The man made no move to stop her. She took another step, her heart pounding in her chest, then paused just at the threshold, glancing over her shoulder at him. "Why?" she rasped, her voice raw from days of silence. "Why would you do this?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he replied softly, "to be stripped of who you are. But I also know that inside you, there's a spark, something the others can't see. They see a prisoner, but I see potential." Yara's brow furrowed in confusion. What did he mean? She had lost everything: her family, her home, her power. The war had taken it all from her. She was broken, just like the others. The man's next words shook her to her core. "I don't want to break you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to show you how to rebuild." Yara felt a strange pull, an invisible force that kept her rooted to the spot. There was something about this man, something that both terrified and intrigued her. Could he be telling the truth? Was there a way for her to regain what she had lost? She glanced at the open door once more, the freedom it promised just a step away. But she couldn't move, not yet. She needed to know more. The man took a step closer, his presence looming. "You have a choice, Yara," he said. "Leave now and continue as you are, broken, afraid, or stay, and I'll show you what true power feels like again." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with tension. Yara's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Could she trust him, or was this just another cruel trick? As the moments stretched on, Yara realized that no matter what happened next, her life would never be the same. She took a deep breath, her decision made. "I'll stay." Yara's words hung in the air, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The man's hooded figure stood still, his shadow stretching long in the dim chamber, as though time itself paused to acknowledge the significance of her decision. The open door behind her now felt like a distant memory, as if stepping through it had always been an impossibility. The man's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Good," he murmured, his voice carrying a subtle weight, a promise. He gestured to a small table on the far side of the room, cluttered with odd, unrecognizable devices and strange artifacts. "You've made the first step, Yara, but this path won't be easy. Rebuilding never is." Yara swallowed hard, her throat dry. The days of silence and torment had left her frail, but somewhere deep within her, she felt a stirring, a flicker of strength. She was scared, yes, but fear had been her companion for too long. She had lived in its shadow ever since the war began. And now, it was time to face something else. Hope. "What do you mean, rebuilding?" she asked, her voice still shaky but gaining steadiness with every word. She stepped away from the cage fully now, her muscles protesting the movement, but her mind resolute. The man moved toward the table and picked up a small, ornate box. He held it with both hands as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. "I mean," he began, opening the box to reveal a shimmering stone the color of molten silver, "that your power, the power of your people, was never truly lost. It was hidden, buried. The war didn't destroy it, Yara. It only masked it, made you forget how to use it." His eyes, now visible beneath the hood, gleamed with intensity. "But I can help you remember." Yara stared at the stone, mesmerized by the way it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She could feel the energy radiating from it, a quiet hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air around her. It called to her, stirring something deep within, something long forgotten. "How?" she whispered, almost afraid of the answer. The man placed the stone back in the box and closed it gently. "There is a process," he explained, his tone patient, as though explaining a delicate procedure to a fragile mind. "Your connection to the elements, the force of nature itself, can be reawakened, but it requires you to face what you've lost, your pain, your fears. Only by confronting them can you reclaim your power." Yara frowned, her heart tightening. Confront her fears. She had spent every waking moment since her capture trying to suppress them, to bury the memories of the war and the loss of her people. How could she possibly face them now? "I don't understand," she admitted, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I've already lost everything. What more is there to face?" The man tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You've lost, yes, but you've never accepted that loss. You've fought against it, denied it. To regain what you once had, you must first embrace the pain of what you've lost. Only then can you move forward." Yara clenched her fists at her sides, her nails biting into the palms of her hands. His words felt like knives, cutting through the walls she had built around her heart. She had always been proud, strong, a warrior like the rest of her people. To admit defeat, to embrace the pain of her failure, felt like betrayal. "I don't know if I can do that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The man took a step closer, his presence radiating a strange, calming energy. "You can," he said softly, "and I'll be here to guide you, but the choice, as always, is yours." For a long moment, Yara stood frozen in place, her mind racing. She didn't want to face her past. She didn't want to feel the crushing weight of her failures and losses. But something about this man, about his strange, quiet confidence, made her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he was right. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. "What do I need to do?" The man smiled again, but this time it was different, softer, more genuine. "You need to remember," he said. "Close your eyes." Hesitant but willing, Yara closed her eyes. The darkness behind her eyelids was familiar, but instead of the suffocating blackness of the cage, it felt different. Warmer, softer. She focused on her breathing, just as the man instructed. And slowly, the sounds of the room faded away, replaced by something else. The memories came, unbidden, but powerful, flooding her mind like a tidal wave. She saw her home, Orvia, its lush forests and sparkling rivers. The cities built in harmony with nature. She remembered the way the wind had once danced at her command, the way the earth had answered her call. But then the war, the humans arriving in their colossal ships, tearing apart her world in search of the precious resources they so desperately needed. She saw the destruction, the fire, the screams of her people. She felt the crushing weight of helplessness, the overwhelming sorrow of loss. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't open her eyes. She let the memories wash over her, let herself feel every ounce of the pain she had tried so hard to ignore. And in that pain, she found something unexpected. Strength. It was faint, a flicker of light in the darkness, but it was there. The man had been right. Her power wasn't gone. It had just been buried beneath the weight of her grief. And now, as she faced that grief, she could feel it stirring again, like embers waiting to be fanned into a flame. She opened her eyes, her breathing heavy but steady, and looked at the man. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "You're beginning to understand," he said quietly. "This is just the first step, but you're stronger than you know, Yara." Yara wiped her tears, nodding slowly. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. "What's next?" she asked, her voice stronger now, the fire within her reigniting. The man's smile deepened. "Next, we rebuild." The chamber seemed smaller now, as if the memories Yara had unleashed made the space too tight to hold her and the burgeoning force stirring inside her. The man stepped back from her, his gaze steady and unreadable as she stood taller, more resolute. Her legs still trembled from weakness, but the fear that had once weighed them down was lifting. "Rebuild," she repeated softly, the words sounding foreign in her mouth, yet full of promise. The man gestured toward the small table again, where the silver stone still pulsed faintly within its ornate box. "Your power is bound to your connection with the elements," he explained, his voice calm, but charged with importance. "Before the war, your people could command the forces of nature, the wind, the earth, the water, and the fire. You've been disconnected from that. To rebuild, you must reconnect." Yara nodded, her eyes flicking to the stone, and then back to the man. "How do I begin?" The man stepped forward and gently lifted the stone from its box, cradling it in his hands as though it were something alive. "The stone is a conduit," he said. "It contains a fraction of the elemental energy your people once wielded. When you touch it, it will show you your true self, the part of you that still remembers the old ways. But be warned," he added, his gaze sharpening. "The stone does not lie. It will show you everything, including the darkness within you." Yara felt a chill run down her spine at his words, but she stepped forward nonetheless. Fear had been her master for too long, and if she was to reclaim her power, she needed to face whatever the stone revealed. "Place your hands over it," The man instructed, holding the stone out toward her. With a deep breath, Yara extended her hands, hesitating for only a moment before resting her palms gently over the stone. As soon as her skin made contact, a jolt of energy shot through her body. As if lightning had struck her core, she gasped, but the pain was fleeting, replaced by a surge of warmth that spread through her veins like fire. Her eyes snapped shut, and the world around her faded. In an instant, she was no longer in the chamber. She stood in the middle of a vast, open plain, the sky above her a deep, swirling gray. The wind howled around her, fierce and wild, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain. She knew this place. This was the elemental plane, the realm where her ancestors had once drawn their power. She could feel the energy of the land beneath her feet, the pulse of the earth calling to her. But there was something wrong. The sky above was dark and turbulent, not the serene blue she remembered from the old tales. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and scorched, and in the distance she saw flames licking at the horizon. The elements were out of balance, just as she was. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. Spinning around, Yara came face to face with herself. Or rather, a shadowy, distorted version of herself. This Yara had no warmth in her eyes, no compassion. Her skin was darkened and cracked, as though she had been burned by the very elements she sought to control. Her lips twisted into a cruel smile as she stepped closer, her voice a mocking echo of Yara's own. "Look at you," the shadow Yara sneered. "Broken, weak, you think you can reclaim what you lost. You're nothing. A failure, just like the rest of your people." Yara's heart clenched, but she stood her ground. This was the darkness the man had warned her about, her own fear and self-doubt, given form. The shadow circled her, its voice dripping with venom. "You let them die. You let everything fall apart. And now you think you can just take it all back." The shadow laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're too late. There's nothing left to rebuild." Yara felt the sting of the words, the truth they held. She had failed. She had lost everything. But as the shadow's words echoed around her, she also felt something else, anger. Not the helpless, consuming rage she had felt during the war, but a righteous, focused anger. This shadow was a reflection of her deepest fears. But it wasn't the whole truth. "You're wrong," Yara said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I did lose, but I'm still here. And as long as I'm here, I can rebuild." The shadow Yara snarled, her features twisting with fury. "You're nothing without the elements. You're powerless." Yara shook her head, stepping toward the shadow, unafraid now. "I may have lost my connection to the elements, but that doesn't mean I'm powerless. My strength doesn't come from the wind or the earth. It comes from within." With those words she reached out, her hand cutting through the air between them, and grasped the shadow by the wrist. The shadow Yara hissed, trying to pull away, but Yara held firm. The warmth she had felt from the stone earlier surged through her again, this time even stronger, and the shadow began to dissolve under her touch, its form unraveling like smoke. "You don't control me anymore," Yara said firmly, her voice echoing in the vastness of the elemental plane. The shadow let out one last shriek before it disintegrated completely, leaving only a faint whisper of doubt behind. The storm clouds above began to part, and the ground beneath Yara's feet healed, the cracks closing, and the scorched earth giving way to lush green grass. She felt the wind shift, no longer a wild, chaotic force, but a gentle breeze that caressed her skin. Her connection was returning. The elements welcomed her back, their energy flowing through her once more. But this time, it was different. She was not just a conduit for their power, she was a partner, an equal. The fire, the wind, the earth, and the water were hers to command. But they also guided her, their ancient wisdom now a part of her. When Yara opened her eyes, she was back in the chamber, her hand still resting on the stone. The man stood before her, watching in silence. "You faced your darkness," he said quietly. "And you've overcome it. Now your true power is yours again." Yara withdrew her hands from the stone, feeling the energy still thrumming beneath her skin. She stood taller now, her body filled with a strength she had thought lost forever. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady and sure. The man's gaze softened. "Now we rebuild, together." Yara's new strength coursed through her like a river, steady and unyielding. The elemental connection she had regained was a part of her once more. But it wasn't just the raw power that mattered. It was the clarity, the balance within herself, that made her whole. She felt different, not invincible, but grounded in a way she hadn't been since before the war. The man watched her closely, his dark eyes reflecting something deeper than mere curiosity. He stepped back, his cloak swirling as if in response to the invisible forces at play in the room. "You're stronger than you realize, Yara," he said. "Stronger than I expected." Yara studied him for a moment. Despite the power she now felt within her, there was still something mysterious about this man, something she couldn't quite place. He had helped her when no one else would, but the question still lingered in her mind. "Why? Who are you?" she asked, her voice calm but insistent. "I have faced my own darkness, but I still don't understand why you're doing this. What do you want from me?" The man's expression shifted slightly, a shadow passing over his features. He crossed his arms, contemplating his next words. "My name is Kellen," he finally said, his tone measured. "And I have no allegiance to the humans who destroyed your world. The war took from me as well, though in different ways." Yara's eyes narrowed. "You're not with the humans." Kellen shook his head. "I was once, but not anymore. Not after what I've seen. The humans have strayed too far, consumed by greed and fear. They've forgotten what they once stood for, and now they're just like any other conquerors. But there are those of us who still believe in something better." Yara's heart skipped a beat. "There are others. Others like you." Kellen nodded. "A rebellion, small but growing. We've been in the shadows, biding our time, waiting for the right moment to strike. We don't have the numbers to face the human regime head-on, but we have something more important: hope. And people like you." Yara felt a flicker of excitement, tempered by caution. "People like me." Kellen stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You're not just any prisoner, Yara. Your people's connection to the elements makes you invaluable. With your power, the rebellion could turn the tide. We could rebuild not just for survival, but for something greater. We could restore balance to what's been broken." Yara's mind raced, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long feeling powerless, defeated, and now here was a chance, no, an opportunity, for something more. But the risk was enormous. If they failed, if they were caught, the consequences would be catastrophic for both her and the rebellion. "You want me to fight," Yara said, her tone neutral, though her heart thudded in her chest. Kellen met her gaze evenly. "I want you to help us rebuild, to give your people a chance to rise again. But the choice is yours. I won't force you into anything." Yara looked down at her hands, still faintly glowing with the energy of the elements. She had thought she'd lost everything: her family, her home, her power. But maybe there was something left to fight for. Maybe she could be more than a captive, more than a victim of the war. Her decision formed with clarity, a steady flame igniting inside her. "I'll join you," she said firmly, meeting Kellen's eyes. "But I'm not doing this just for your rebellion. I'm doing it for my people, for Orvia." Kellen's lips curved into a rare fleeting smile. "Then we fight together." He turned, gesturing for Yara to follow him out of the chamber. "There's much to prepare. The others will want to meet you. They've been waiting for someone like you, someone who can lead." Yara blinked. "Lead? I'm no leader, Kellen." Kellen glanced back at her, his expression serious. "You survived the destruction of your world. You faced your own darkness and overcame it. That makes you more of a leader than you realize." The weight of his words settled on Yara's shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility, one she had never expected to carry, but one she couldn't ignore. As they stepped out of the chamber and into the cool night air, Yara felt the energy of the world around her like never before. The wind whispered through the trees, the earth hummed beneath her feet, and the stars above seemed to burn brighter, as if in anticipation. Helen led her through a hidden path, away from the prison where she had been held, toward a concealed outpost nestled deep in the mountains. Along the way, Yara saw signs of the rebellion, discreet signals carved into rocks, hidden campsites masked by the foliage. It was clear that Callan and his people had been planning this for a long time, waiting for the right moment to strike. They finally reached a small, fortified encampment. A few figures stood guard at the entrance, their faces obscured by hoods, but Yara could sense the tension in the air as they recognized Callan and the newcomer at his side. They exchanged quick glances, murmurs passing between them, but no one stopped them as Callan led Yara inside. The camp was alive with quiet activity, people moving between tents, gathering supplies, repairing equipment. It was a humble operation, but there was an unmistakable energy here, a sense of purpose that resonated with Yara. Callan brought her to the center of the camp, where a small group of figures waited. They were older, their faces lined with the marks of hardship, but their eyes gleamed with determination. One of them, a woman with short-cropped gray hair and sharp, calculating eyes, stepped forward. "Callan," she said, her voice low but strong. "You've returned." Callan inclined his head. "And I bring someone with me, Yara of Orvia." The woman's gaze swept over Yara, her expression unreadable. "You found one of them," she murmured, a note of surprise in her voice. "An Orvian with power." Yara met the woman's gaze, feeling the weight of her scrutiny. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was something more now, something that could change the course of this war. "Yara isn't just one of them," Callan said, his voice steady. "She's a survivor, and she's ready to fight." The woman nodded slowly, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Then let's hope she's as strong as you say, Callan, because we're going to need all the strength we can get." Yara felt the pulse of the elements in her veins, a steady reminder of the power she had reclaimed. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. The rebellion had begun, and Yara would be at its heart. The camp settled into a quiet, tense rhythm as the night deepened. Yara stood at the edge of the gathering, her senses attuned to the subtle hum of the wind and the whisper of the trees around her. The weight of what lay ahead pressed against her mind, but it no longer felt like an impossible burden. It felt like the inevitable path she had to walk. Callan had left her in the care of the camp's leaders, after a brief introduction, retreating into a private meeting with the gray-haired woman who was evidently one of the rebellion's key figures. The rest of the camp remained cautious, their eyes following Yara with thinly veiled curiosity. She was an outsider, a symbol of something they hadn't expected: hope. The flickering firelight cast long shadows across the ground as Yara approached a small group gathered around one of the hearths. A young man, his face smudged with soot, was adjusting a cooking pot, while a few others sat, their backs hunched with exhaustion. The group fell silent as Yara neared, their eyes flicking toward her, uncertain. "May I sit?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The man with the pot blinked, then nodded. "Sure. Of course," he stammered. "Please." Yara lowered herself to the ground, her muscles aching with the residual soreness of her captivity. The fire crackled between them, casting warmth against the cool night air. For a moment, no one spoke, the tension palpable. Finally, one of the women, her hair tied back in a loose braid, spoke up. "We've heard of Orvians," she said, her tone cautious, "but never met one. What was your world like before?" Yara took a slow breath, memories of Orvia swirling in her mind. She could still see the vibrant landscapes, the towering crystal spires that hummed with elemental energy, the lush forests teeming with life. Her heart clenched at the thought of what had been lost, but she steadied herself. "It was beautiful," she said quietly. "We were connected to everything. Nature, the elements, even each other. The energy of our world was a part of us. But when the humans came, they tore it apart." The others listened in silence, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and guilt. Yara could see it in their eyes, the awareness that their own kind had been responsible for the devastation. Yet, she sensed no malice from them, only the shared burden of living in a world marred by war. The young man with the cooking pot cleared his throat awkwardly. "We're not all like them," he muttered, his eyes darting toward the fire. "The ones who destroyed your planet, I mean." Yara's gaze softened slightly. "I know," she said. "If you were, I wouldn't be here." The tension eased somewhat, though the weight of the conversation still hung over them like a cloud. Yara knew that the scars of the war ran deep, not just for her, but for everyone who had survived. They were all victims of a conflict that had spun out of control, driven by fear, greed, and desperation. As the conversation lulled, the woman with the braid spoke again, her voice more hesitant this time. "You're different, though. We've heard rumors that the Orvians had power. Is that true? Are you really connected to the elements?" Yara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. The power she had regained was still raw, still settling within her, and she didn't fully understand it yet. But she had made her choice. She had chosen to fight, and that meant embracing what she was. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "We are. I am." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but there was also a glimmer of fascination in their eyes. They had never seen someone like her before, someone who could wield the primal forces of nature. To them, it was something beyond their comprehension, something powerful and unknown. The woman leaned forward slightly. "Can you show us?" Yara felt a flicker of uncertainty. She wasn't sure if she was ready to display her abilities, especially after only just beginning to reconnect with them. But as she looked at the faces around the fire, worn, tired, and yet hopeful, she realized that this was more than just curiosity. They wanted to believe in something, to see that power could still exist in a world so ravaged by destruction. Slowly, Yara extended her hand toward the fire. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, feeling the flickering energy of the flames, the warmth that danced in the air. She breathed in, steadying herself, and then, with a soft exhale, she coaxed the fire to rise. The flames responded to her touch, leaping higher into the air, twisting and spiraling, as if alive. The group gasped, their eyes wide with awe as the fire swirled in intricate patterns, casting shadows that danced across their faces. For a moment, the war, the pain, the fear, it all seemed to melt away, replaced by the wonder of something ancient and powerful. Yara guided the flames for a few moments longer, then gently released her hold. The fire settled back to its normal state, crackling quietly in the hearth. She opened her eyes to find the others staring at her in stunned silence. The woman with the braid was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was incredible." Yara offered a small smile, though she felt a tremor of exhaustion ripple through her. "It's a part of me," she said softly, "just as it's a part of my world." The others nodded, still processing what they had witnessed. The tension that had lingered before seemed to dissipate, replaced by a newfound sense of respect. Yara was no longer just a stranger in their midst. She was something more, an ally, perhaps even a symbol of hope. As the night wore on, and the camp settled into a quiet slumber, Yara found herself standing alone at the edge of the encampment, gazing out into the darkened wilderness beyond. The stars glittered overhead, their distant light offering a faint sense of comfort. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Kellen approaching, his cloak billowing slightly in the breeze. "You're becoming quite popular," he said, his tone light but with a hint of approval. Yara shrugged, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "They're curious, and I suppose they need something to believe in." Kalen nodded, stepping beside her. Hope is a powerful thing, more powerful than most realize. Yara glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. Do you really think we can win this war? The rebellion, I mean. Kalen's gaze was steady, unwavering. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Yara looked back toward the horizon, her mind swirling with thoughts of what lay ahead. The war had taken so much from her, but it hadn't taken everything. Not yet. We'll need more than hope, she said quietly. We'll need to be ready. Kalen's smile was faint, but it carried a weight of determination. We will be. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant promise of a new dawn, Yara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days that followed moved swiftly, filled with preparations, training, and planning. Yara became an integral part of the rebellion, not just because of her elemental abilities, but because of her resilience. She bonded with the rebels, sharing stories, strategies, and the unspoken hope that this battle, this final stand, could turn the tide of the war. Kalen was often at her side, guiding her through combat drills and teaching her the ways of human warfare. In return, Yara shared what she knew of the Orvian connection to the elements, showing him how she drew strength from the world around her. The rebellion was small, but it was growing. Word spread of Yara's presence, and more joined their cause, inspired by the idea that someone from Orvia, a world humans had tried to destroy, was willing to fight with them for a better future. As their forces grew, so did the threat. The human empire, once fractured and desperate, was regrouping. Their resources, dwindling as they were, remained vast, and their army was ruthless. Reports came in of more camps, more soldiers mobilizing, preparing to stamp out the rebellion before it could gain real momentum. But Yara wasn't afraid, not anymore. One night, as the camp bustled with activity, Kalen called a meeting of the leaders. Yara joined them in the war tent, her heart steady but her mind focused. A map of the region lay spread across a table, marked with key locations where the Empire had fortified their positions. We have to hit them here, Kellen said, pointing to a large fortress near the coast. It's a supply hub, crucial to their operations in this part of the continent. If we can take it, we'll cut off their reinforcements and supplies. It'll buy us time to regroup and strike at their core. One of the other leaders, a tall woman named Maris, frowned. That's a heavily guarded fortress. Even with Yara's powers, we'll be walking into a death trap. Yara studied the map, her mind racing through possibilities. What if we don't walk in at all? She said, her voice calm but sharp. The others turned to her, curious. What if we use the elements? The coast. It's vulnerable to the sea. Could summon a storm, disrupt their defenses from a distance. It would give us the chaos we need to infiltrate the fortress. Kalen raised an eyebrow, impressed. A storm would definitely give us an advantage, but can you control it on that scale? Yara met his gaze, a flicker of determination in her violet eyes. I can try. The plan was set. They would strike at dawn, using Yara's abilities to weaken the fortress's defenses while the rebel forces moved in. It was risky, but they didn't have the luxury of time. The Empire was closing in, and this was their best shot at gaining ground. The night before the assault, Yara stood at the edge of the camp, gazing out at the distant horizon where the fortress lay. The ocean's steady rhythm whispered to her, its vast power calling out. She had never attempted to summon a storm of this magnitude, but she knew she had to try. For her people, for the rebellion. Kellen approached, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the moon. Are you ready? He asked quietly. Yara nodded, though her heart raced with anticipation. I have to be. Kellen placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. You're not alone in this. We all have a part to play. No matter what happens, know that you've already given these people something they thought they'd lost. Hope, Yara whispered, finishing his thought. He smiled faintly. Yes, hope. At dawn, The rebellion marched toward the fortress. Yara took her position on a cliff overlooking the sea, the wind whipping through her hair. Below her, the rebel forces were hidden, waiting for her signal. The fortress loomed in the distance, its dark walls towering against the sky, its defenses bristling with weapons and soldiers. Yara closed her eyes, feeling the pull of the ocean, the energy of the wind, the quiet power of the storm that lurked just beyond the horizon. She breathed in deeply, focusing her mind, reaching out with her spirit. The air crackled with anticipation as she summoned the elements. The first gust of wind hit the fortress with a howl, rattling the walls. The sea began to churn, its waves rising, crashing against the shore with increasing fury. Yara's hands glowed with a faint blue light as she concentrated, directing the storm's force toward the fortress. The sky darkened, and the clouds swirled overhead, thick and menacing. Lightning cracked through the sky, striking the walls of the fortress with deafening force. The soldiers inside scrambled, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught of nature's fury. The wind howled louder, and the waves crashed higher, flooding the lower levels of the fortress and throwing their defenses into chaos. Now, Kalen's voice echoed from below as the rebel forces surged forward, using the storm as cover to infiltrate the fortress. The clash of weapons and the shouts of battle soon filled the air, mingling with the roar of the storm. Yara stood on the cliff, maintaining her connection to the storm, her body trembling with the effort. She could feel the energy pulsing through her, raw and powerful, but it was taking its toll. Her vision blurred, and her limbs ached from the strain. But she couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. Kalen and a small team of rebels had made it inside the fortress, cutting through the soldiers with precision. Yara watched from her vantage point, her heart pounding as the battle raged below. The rebels fought fiercely, pushing back the Imperial forces with everything they had. But then, amidst the chaos, Yara saw something that made her blood run cold. Massive Imperial warship appeared on the horizon, its dark silhouette cutting through the storm. Reinforcements. If they made it to the shore, the rebellion would be crushed. Yara's chest tightened. She had to stop that ship. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, she reached out to the storm once more, calling on the winds and the sea. The storm answered her call, growing more violent, more furious. The waves rose higher, crashing against the warship with relentless force. The ship rocked, its crew struggling to maintain control, but Yara wasn't finished. She focused on the lightning, guiding it toward the ship's mast. With a deafening crack, the lightning struck, splintering the wood and sending the ship into chaos. The warship listed to one side, its crew scrambling to abandon it as it began to sink beneath the storm's relentless assault. Yara gasped, her body shaking with exhaustion. The storm had taken everything from her, drained her to the core. She collapsed to her knees, her vision darkening as the storm slowly began to fade. But as she fell, she saw something that filled her with hope. The fortress walls were crumbling. The rebellion had broken through. When Yara awoke, she was in the rebel camp, her body wrapped in blankets, her muscles sore but alive. Kellen sat beside her, his face lined with worry, but when he saw her open her eyes, a smile broke across his face. "We did it," he said softly. "The fortress is ours. You did it." Yara blinked, her mind slowly processing the words. They had won. The rebellion had taken the fortress. The Empire had been dealt a serious blow. She smiled weakly, relief flooding through her. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered. Kalen squeezed her hand, his voice full of admiration. "No, but you made it possible." The camp was alive with celebration, the rebels cheering their victory, their spirits lifted higher than they had been in years. They had struck a blow against the Empire, a blow that would ripple across the land, inspiring others to rise up and fight. Yara lay back, exhaustion tugging at her, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel hope, not just for herself, but for the future. She had found her power again, but more than that, she had found her purpose. The battle wasn't over. The war was still far from won. But Yara knew, deep in her heart, that the flames of rebellion had been lit, and they would not be extinguished. Together, they would rise. Together, they would fight. And together, they would reclaim their freedom.